Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 62nd episode of Reaching Your Firm. Today's themes, we're going to be talking about humor and humor in business meetings, which is something I don't think we've really covered before. And I think that will be a really interesting area. We're looking at leadership behaviors and how do people in leadership roles actually manage to really do great things in a hybrid environment. And then we're going to be looking at a few medical myths, and I won't tell you what the medical myths we're going to be covering today, but it's exciting. So let's move back to me. So what are we doing today? Well, who's on? Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome Dr. Sarah Hattam. And Sarah is a GP and founder of Concilio Health. And she's, as I said, debunking some of the more medical myths impacting the workplace, which she does as part of her business, Concilio Health. So welcome, Sarah. And this is her third visit, I believe, on this particular show. So that's great. Our second guest is Santiago Iniguez. And Santiago is the president of IE University. And he's going to be talking to us today on strengthening your leadership through bringing humor to business meetings. And if you haven't read his articles in LinkedIn, he's one of their global writers, then absolutely worth reading. They're brilliant. Our third guest is Vlatka Hlupic. Vlatka is the Chief Executive Officer of Management Shift Solutions. And she's going to be talking about some of the leadership behaviors that create high-performing hybrid workplaces. Our fourth panelist and our regular is Francesca Lagerberg, who is the global leader network capabilities at Thornton International, and is not only on this show, but is also on the transatlantic version of the show, which, as you may be aware, is running next week, which is very exciting for our second episode. So welcome, Francesca. And then yours truly, the founder and chief executive of the Managing Partners Forum. So welcome. So what are we going to talk about first? Well, I wanted to quickly run through some forum news. The next transatlantic show, as I mentioned, is on the 3rd of November. And we've got a very well-known guy, Julian Birkinshaw, who is from London Business School, and Tim Murphy, who's a partner of Canadian law firm Macmillan. And he was also the former chief of staff to the Canadian Prime Minister. So it brings a very interesting political perspective. Many lawyers just spend their whole life in the same law firm. He certainly hasn't. And the regulars, I mentioned, are Francesca and also Dr. Larry Richard, who was amazing, I think, on the last show. And if you haven't read some of his material about lawyer behaviors and how to manage them, fascinating stuff. Remind you that lots and lots of people, hundreds in fact, are watching these videos. So please do look at them on the Reaching Your Firm tab in our website. The current set of weekly roundtables, we're looking at optimal management practices. And the topic we're currently doing is management practices. And the next one we're looking at is innovation and productivity. And that coincides with the launch of the Fast Track Innovation Guide and Bespoke Sprints, which again, you'll hear lots more about. Quick nudge about peer groups. As I said, 100% renewals, and there is a number of new groups forming this autumn. We're also focusing on firm non-sector leaders. We had a really interesting meeting of the people who are in law firms and are not actually themselves lawyers. And that's about 10% of the top 200 law firms have somebody who is the leader, usually an accountant, but it could be a banker, it could be a marketing person, a number of different backgrounds. And we got that group together and they felt like ships in the night, I think, that it was so nice, they said, not to be in a room of outliers and to have real business conversations with each other. So watch this space and I'll report back as that group grows, because it's only got 27 people who could be members. So it's quite small, but hey, that's important. And I know you know this by now, but the show is now fortnightly. So what else do we want to do? Well, I wanted to basically take you through the feedback from the UK government. And if you recall, what the UK government has told us is that our poll results are incredibly valuable in the analysis during these dynamic times. So I wanted to really just say thank you very much to UK government for that feedback. I mean, what more can I say? Now, when I think about the ONS study that we talked about last week, I thought it would be quite interesting just to remind you of what the ONS study, Office for National Statistics, is actually saying, because I think it's really relevant to a lot of what the Managing Partners Forum is about. They say that management practices are a form of capital that changes slowly over time, I love that expression, management practice being capital. It's a lovely thinking, economic capital. It really is a great way of thinking about it, because you can't just invent management practices. They really take a lot of time, and I'm sure Vlatka will pick up on some of these points a bit later. The overall relationship, they say, between management practices and productivity is strong, significant, and positive, even during the pandemic that we've just experienced. And that was what the study said. And they also go on to say that better managed firms have retained their productivity advantages over comparable peers. And the area that's particularly important is employment practices. And as I said, Vlatka is regularly voted one of the top HR influencers in the world. So the employment practices, that will definitely resonate with her, followed by KPIs. So targets, I'm afraid, don't come a little bit lower on the list. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, let's just run through the poll that we did last week. We said that people-based activities, and that was communication, motivation, and getting the best from your teams, are seen as the most effective management practices to achieve business goals. But, there was a but in life, isn't there? Actually, how you go about measuring employee engagement, we found was very reliant on exit interviews, which is sort of the wrong people at the wrong time, far too late. Independent research, which I always think is a bit impersonal, or waiting for people to raise issues with you, which is definitely fairly detached management. So if you don't really know what your people feel, then to make that the most effective management practice, there's a bit of a problem there. In terms of how do you actually improve your management practices, well, there were a variety of experiences. Working collaboratively and challenging assignments were really the things that were felt as most important. And the things that came very low on that list were formal training, reading books, and social media. And here we are on social media with some great authors and trainers on the panel, but we still think that we can make a big difference. But what people are saying is, you really want to improve your management practices, it's experiential. I think most of us combine with that. The one that I find fascinating is the inconsistency of review of management's contribution. What they're basically saying is, look, management's contribution to these initiatives isn't really being measured very effectively as they end. But there is a strong link between reward and the outputs of performance systems. So I'm kind of thinking, whoops, that really doesn't quite stack up. So let's look at a few of those pictures just quickly. And I appreciate you may not be able to read this. It's quite small, so my apologies. But it basically is saying that communication effectively is taking up 80-odd%, that understanding and motivating others 56%, making change happen 56%. So that's that one. In terms of the question we looked at was, how do you find out what people feel about working for you? Exit interview 69, independent employee research 63, direct personal feedback from individual employees 63, and towards the bottom, unidentified comments from a trusted individual 6%. Well, actually, that's quite helpful. I think the unidentified comments, sometimes called what they call pulse systems and stuff like that. So not there, but never mind. What about the most effective ways? Exposed variety of experiences, 81% included in their top 3, 69% working collaboratively, and 44% challenging assignments. In terms of the last one, just a quick slide here. How consistently is management performance reviewed at the end of each initiative at your firm? This is a bit depressing. Not part of how we work. That's over on the left, 19%. Rarely, 19%. Sometimes, 38%. Regularly, 13%. Part of how we work, 13%. So in other words, for 3/4 of the firms, the management's performance, management's contribution to initiative is not being actually measured consistently. There's an amazing amount of work goes into measuring technical performance by the frontline advisors, everything associated with that. But management, admin, sorry, well, that's what sometimes they're referred to, I know. But management's contribution, sadly, doesn't get the same input. So there we go. So what are we going to do today? I wanted to do a poll on innovation. And for those of you who have done it before, we did it way back. I think it was in about May or June of last year. So let's just run through what's it's all about. Well, the poll basically covers a number of things. We're looking at the level of maturity around innovation, the seniority of the person driving innovation, the extent innovation is seen as critical for growth and client retention, the extent it's seen as a key touch point with clients, and the extent it's seen as important for enhanced productivity. We're looking at some of the questions around the innovation process and the culture of innovation. We're looking at the impact of innovation and the impact of people sharing ideas. Does it make any difference? And finally, what are some of the innovation tools that are being deployed? So, okay, let's look at these as we take them through. So the first question was looking at what we could call the overall level of maturity. And looking at that, we've got a range. Nobody is at 10, which was amazing. A small percentage at 7 and 8. The biggest one would have been around about 5, 6. There's evidence of it, but it's not inclusive and it feels sporadic. So there you go. Second question was about seniority. Who's responsible? A third of you, it's the firm-wide leader. Third, someone at the divisional level, and only one of you has no one responsible. Talking about to what extent you believe innovation is critical for growth. A third saying it's an essential precondition, and the balance saying it's important. So nobody's saying it's unimportant, which is cool. To what extent is it a key touch point with clients? Very similar feedback on that question too. And to what extent you believe it's important for enhanced productivity, it's slightly switched around. So 2/3 of you saying it's an essential precondition. So if you want to enhance your productivity, you have to have innovation. And interesting, there's some ONS study, which we didn't talk about today, which looks into innovation and comes to a very similar conclusion. Which of the statements are true? And again, this is mainly about processes. So only a very small percentage, 20%, have got defined processes for innovation. The similar percentage only encourage fast track innovation. Most of you are giving you outsourcing, I could call it, but making them run by specialists, which is has its disadvantages, because the question then is who owns the project. Excuse. Around half of you say it's helping you colleagues to discuss and challenge ideas. 20% or so have a defined budget. Hardly anybody are using the clients to drive innovation, and nobody is really looking at the processes. Nobody has really a fully documented innovation strategy. There really isn't anybody fully accountable for driving innovation. Yes, people are actively encouraged to share their ideas, but it sounds to me in a fairly sort of unstructured context. There is a culture of innovation that's being fostered by some of you, but not very many. Most people aren't aware of the culture of innovation. Very few people are fully engaged in it. Very few outcomes are set regularly from innovation. So what can I say? I don't think that the processes and the culture of innovation are very mature, which kind of summarize. It kind of goes back to the first question, I guess. What about results when people are encouraged to share ideas? The main areas around employee engagement. There isn't very much around talent attraction or talent retention or indeed workforce enablement. So it's mostly about making people feel good about the firm, I guess. Which are the areas that are most impacted? Again, employee engagement comes through very strongly. The one after that is probably productivity, and then all the others get kind of an even one, apart from understanding client needs. That really doesn't seem to figure, which I guess if you're not consulting your clients, it wouldn't make sense. But actually, there is a lot that can be done in that area. And then finally, what are you actually doing about what models you're using? Innovation teams, the most popular, and then basically, well, some people aren't using any models at all, and then you've got kind of an even between design sprints, open innovation, partnering for innovation. Nobody in the group is crowdsourcing. Nobody's using incubators. So that's the feedback from the innovation survey we did today. So fascinating stuff, as they say. So I will now, if I may, hand on to our first proper presenter. And I would like to introduce Sarah Hattam, Dr. Sarah Hattam, who has been on the show already. And she is coming to talk to us today about a topic that she will disclose in a second from our, what shall I say, a very interesting medical perspective. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Richard. It's delightful to be with you again this morning. So thank you for inviting me back onto the show. Here's a bit of Friday trivia for you. What do killer whales and pilot whales have in common with Homo sapiens? Well, they're the only mammalian species to go through menopause. October is menopause month, so it seemed only fitting that we use this very short time to sift some facts from fiction on this issue, which finally is gaining traction in the workplace. Because after all, menopause is an inevitability for 50% of the working population. But please don't switch off at this point if you have a Y chromosome, because at some point, a woman in your life, whether she be a friend, mother, sister, partner, or a colleague, will be in menopause transition, and immensely grateful for your understanding and support. So I want to bust a few myths this morning. The first is that the face of menopause is not always obvious. Yes, the average age of menopause in the UK at the moment is 51. And it's true to say that the majority of women will go through menopause between their mid-40s and their mid-50s. However, 1% of women will go through menopause under the age of 40. And 1 in 1,000 women go through menopause under the age of 30. And for other women, surgery or cancer treatment means that they hit menopause much, much earlier. So wipe that image of a grey-haired woman looking like she's just got out of the swimming pool, fanning herself, right out of your mind now, because we can't afford to make assumptions. The second is, just remember your own adolescence, when your own hormones were wreaking havoc, to try to emphasize with this phase of a woman's life, which honestly feels like reverse puberty. Menopause comes from the Latin, menos is month, pausos is ending. And whilst it's a natural part of the aging process for a woman, as the ovaries run out of eggs, the monthly cycles sputter a bit and then eventually stop, a woman finds herself riding this estrogen roller coaster, and it's not a pleasant ride. My local airport is Leeds Bradford, and it has that nail-biting combination of a shorter than average runway and being on the top of a hill. And as we know, the weather's always grim up north. So it's always a bumpy landing, and very much like menopause transition, in which a woman's estrogen levels, yes, they are on a downward trajectory, but it's very much a sawtooth, up and down fluctuation, day to day, moment to moment. The problem is we don't just have estrogen receptors in the obvious places in a woman's body, we have them in our brain. We have them inside our brain's short-term memory area, the hippocampus. We have them in our brain's thermostat area. We have them in our sleep centers and our mood brain centers as well. So for women in work, this is a really tricky time. The third myth, if you like, is that you don't go through the menopause. Women don't go through the menopause. Once estrogen has left the building, it's a permanent state of affairs for that woman. Estrogen and actually testosterone levels don't suddenly make a comeback a few years later. Women go on to spend a third of their lives potentially in this post-menopausal hormone depleted state. The next myth is that HRT is dangerous. Hormone replacement therapy is dangerous. No, it's not. It's the most effective treatment for menopause symptoms. We're simply adding back the hormones that are lacking. Sadly, it's had a scandalous bad rep over the years, thanks to the media, who have never been able to understand the difference between relative and absolute risk. So for the majority of women, hormone replacement therapy started within 10 years of the menopause is not only safe and effective for symptoms, but it has many benefits for bones, for brain protection against dementia, and heart protection. And finally, menopause is not just an individual issue. It is a critical organisational and an I&D issue. And thanks to the Equality Act, and because menopause symptoms unfortunately go on for several years, menopause is covered not just by age and sex, but also by disability under the protected characteristics of the Act. And so businesses really can't afford to have a discrimination case brought because they failed to make reasonable adjustments. The compensation figures are eye-watering, believe me. So today, as Carolyn Harris brings her private members bill on menopause, let's commit to support and do everything we can to keep this valuable asset that is menopausal women in the workplace. Thank you very much for listening.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. And one of the people who are watching today has already put a note into the chat saying how much they love that feedback. So thank you. I know it's not a topic that I've ever talked about much in my life, so thank you so much for bringing it up. I'd like to introduce our second guest. And our second guest today is Santiago Iniguez, who is the president of IE University. And if you ever talk to anybody about being the dean of a business school, they will always say, oh, well, Santiago is the model that we've all follow. And so, but he also writes amazingly interesting stuff, particularly in LinkedIn and in more serious contexts as well, I'm sure. And I saw a really interesting article he wrote recently about humor and how you can actually strengthen your leadership through bringing humor to business meetings. So Santiago, come and tell us about it. You're on mute at the moment.
Thanks, Richard, for your very kind words and for having me here. I'm going to talk about a very serious matter, which is laughter at work. In fact, when scientists and psychologists talk about laughter and humor, they normally make a very serious, very boring statement. But I guess it's quite important to realize that we just passed a pandemic, and that over the pandemic we have discovered something which is very important. We don't laugh enough. We are in fact in the middle of a laughter crisis. In fact, if you check research, you may realize that babies laugh on average 400 times a day, but people over 35 years old only 15 times. This is also complemented by a recent study of Gallup data in the US that shows that we laugh significantly less on weekdays than what we do on weekends. And I wonder what are, the variables, the equivalent ratio if we look at Asian countries. Anyway, we all realize that work is a very serious matter. But probably we take the wrong assumption that productivity is essentially linked to seriousness, that laugh is a distraction. And this association between work and seriousness leads many to keep a straight face as we go about our business. At meetings or interviews, we should avoid mirth, be very practical, get to the point, avoid preambles, anecdotes, and other unproductive comments. After all, we've been paid for the hours we put in, so not focusing exclusively on executive tasks is surely a waste of time. This has been, of course, being emphasized, as we all realize, over teleworking, because meetings on Zoom or Teams, tend to be very much focused on decision-making and sharing information. Interestingly, another piece of research tells that leaders with a sense of humor are 27% better able to motivate others and inspire admiration than their unsmiling counterparts, and that their employees identify with their company by 15% more, as well as being twice as likely to solve problems and creative challenges, all of which, of course, translates into a much better performance and results. This is, of course, consistent with available data, showing that one of the factors that significantly improves job performance is having friends in the workplace, someone to laugh with and share jokes with. So the first conclusion that I would like to share with the audience is that taking a humorous approach to meetings and professional gatherings is a practice that will strengthen your leadership and make your work much more entertaining. However, allow me to share a few guidelines in order to manage, this sense of humor and playing jokes in the office. The first guideline or recommendation is not to turn a meeting into an open mic session. You must know when and how much humor to apply. A good belly laugh can bring people together, particularly in times of crisis. And I'm sure that we have all lived situations where by introducing humor, we are able to solve challenges and problems and get, to the solution much faster, even overnight. But not every encounter, of course, requires such catharsis. Sometimes a smile-inducing comment is enough, and we all know the salutary effects of wit. My second recommendation is that we avoid, of course, offending other people or groups with our jokes. And the advice of the master of discourse, Dale Carnegie, the leader of public communication, whose first lesson was don't criticize, I guess is particularly applicable here. My recommendation would be that if you're facing diverse audiences, you apply the proverb, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So, of course, if you are addressing a speech at a corporate board in Japan, you probably have to be more serious than if you are attending a meeting in the US, where, as you all know, people normally start their addresses with some sorts of humorous comment or joke. Another recommendation, never tell the same joke to the same people twice, because in addition of appearing dull, you will fail to meet one of the requirements of jokes, which is actually the surprise factor. My third recommendation is that you do not let jokes and fun get in the way of your meeting agenda. Humor should be a tool that serves good management, but not detract, from decision making or from being efficient. The question of whether to use humor in circumstances of extreme gravity or adversity, of course, is a delicate one. And I believe that there's no one-size-fits-all advice or maxim here. I guess we all have anecdotes, probably related to mourning situations where we have realized about the power of humor. And playing a joke or making, a nice comment can always, have this effect of ice breaking. So I very much recommend that you don't lose your sense of humor, even in those very special circumstances. And finally, what I guess is that given that we spend 2/3 of our time working in the office, why shouldn't we actually make the working space, an opportunity to enjoy and have fun? What I'm sure is that if you practice these recommendations, you will become much more productive, you will make more friends, and you will become a much better leader. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Santiago. And again, it's a great topic, which I think few of us probably take into account enough, but I certainly believe strongly that leaders who are humorless, I came across one recently and called him Machine Gun, because all he ever did was send out one-liners and you bang, 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 bang. It's like, this guy is not communicating at all. So thank you. Right, our third guest is Vlatka Hlupic, and she's the Chief Executive Officer of Management Shift Solutions, which is a great organization, training organization. It's built on some books she's written, which are brilliant if you haven't come across them, which look at the management shift and how you can actually change your whole management approach and really move closer to what is often called level 5 leadership, rather than the more traditional command and control level 3. And she's coming to talk to us today about, again, an article that she wrote recently on some of the leadership behaviors that create high-performing hybrid workplaces. So let's hear what Vlatka say. Over to you, Vlatka.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Richard, for inviting me on your show. Well, today I'm going to talk about leadership behavior, and I'm going to use the lens of the 5 levels of the management shift model that I developed on the basis of many, many years of my interdisciplinary research, looking into lots of theories and models and frameworks from organizational behavior, neuroscience, leadership development, consciousness development, and so on. And I figured out that there are 5 levels that our individual mindset goes through, and there is a corresponding organizational culture at every level. And every level is characterized by specific thinking patterns, emotions, language use, leadership style and behavior, and there is a corresponding organizational culture at every level. So I'm going to take you briefly through those 5 levels, and then I will talk about in more depth what are the desirable behaviors that leaders have to show, especially today in this post-pandemic world. So level 1, the mindset is lifeless and culture is apathetic. Not much gets done. There is lots of fear, blame, worry, toxic leadership style, leaders yelling at their employees. It's not a good place to be. And then at level 2, we have reluctant mindset and stagnating culture. At that level, people do a minimum they can get away with just to get their paycheck. So they bring their body to work, but their heart and mind stay at home. They take long lunch breaks and they dream about being somewhere else. They would do anything but be at work. And leaders are very uninspiring. Think about David Brent in TV series Office, completely uninspiring leader. And then at level 3, we have control mindset and orderly culture. At level 3, we tick the boxes, we achieve KPIs, we are micromanaged. We do what we are told to do by big bosses that often have big egos. So levels 1, 2, 3, this is where majority of organizations are today. I would say about 80–85% of organizations are around those levels. And this is the main reason why we see low levels of engagement, low passion for work, low levels of purpose, low productivity, and often low profit as well. So in order to lead effectively, and especially in the post-pandemic world, we need to shift leadership behavior, the mindset of employees, and the entire organizational culture to level 4. Something magic happens at level 4. The keywords are trust, transparency, purpose, collaboration, networking. Also having a good sense of humor, as Santiago described. It's about having fun working. And that level, we see a step change increase in performance, innovation, engagement, productivity, and profit. In some cases, we saw 100% increase in profit within even a year after this big shift has occurred. Occasionally, we can reach level 5 with limitless mindset and unbounded culture. At level 5, we see teams working day and night on some amazing innovations for humanity, driven by their love of humanity, and they work on big problems such as solving pandemic, global recession, global pandemic, and so on. So the objective is to be at level 4 and occasionally reach level 5, because we can't be at level 5 all the time, we would just burn out. But being at level 4, we can then tap into the energy of level 5, be very creative, solve big problems. And if we go for difficulties, we can temporarily slip down to lower levels, but we bounce back quickly and easily to level 4. And to give you more examples of leadership behaviors at level 4, occasionally level 5 would be, well, first of all, have flexibility, allow people to decide when, where, and how they're going to do their work. So you can't micromanage them from level 3 anymore. But also inspire them to come to office, at least occasionally, to have these face-to-face interactions, which are very, very important for innovation, creativity. Also empower them to make their decisions where they're most competent and to distribute decision-making. So let those people with the best knowledge, most appropriate knowledge for a customer, make decisions. Be mindful of purpose, provide clarity, and make sure people are really excited and energized and engaged around the common purpose, which will be around not just making profit for company, but making this world a better place, contributing to community. As Peter Drucker said, companies have to be a force for good for the society. Also create psychological safety. So it is safe to speak up, to tell the truth, create this two-way communication, not just this machine gun, as you mentioned, Richard, a style of communication, but it has to be mutual. Give autonomy. And last but not least, be a compassionate leader. There's so many research studies coming out now that employees want well-being, they want psychological safety, and they want to also have some sense of stability. And compassionate leaders, humane leaders, level 4, 5 leaders can create such environments which will create conditions for high-performing hybrid workplaces. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vlatka. And there was so much stuff there. I shall have to watch that video at least 3 times to take it all in. And if you haven't read the book Management Shift, it's just the absolute Bible, I think, for this way of the link between your behavior and the culture and how they then create levels of interaction. But as I said, avoid the burnout. I always think level 5, it's a very, very scary place. Right, we're now going to invite Francesca to join us and to come and give her thoughts on what she's heard today. We had Sarah talking about the menopause. We had Santiago talking about humor, and Vlatka talking about how if you actually move to the right level of management, you will achieve amazing things. Over to you, Francesca.
Oh, morning, Richard. Morning, everybody. Good Lord, what an inspiring morning it's been. I got to say, listening to Sarah, just had to get a little bit of paper out. What an awesome thing to be flagging in terms of the whole menopause piece has been one of those taboo subjects that everybody has pretended hasn't happened and has kept as sort of like a rather unpleasant secret. And when you think of how many senior leaders are over 50 and may potentially be going through some of those symptoms, it's hugely important people both talk about it, understand it, and actually have a real appreciation for the impact that it has. Also explain to people the health benefits of doing things that can be supportive. There's been some amazing things happening of late in the UK around promoting both the ability to talk about this issue, to bring it into the workplace, to understand what's going on, and it's very, very important. I know so many of my colleagues, including myself, who have got stories to tell around this, and I think it's a fantastically important area to be alive to, and also to keep giving people the best chance to be their best at work as well. So thank you for that, Sarah. There is an awful lot more we could talk about on that one, and I'd love to catch up with you about it at some stage. I'd also love to hear what you think about perimenopause, which is sort of all those issues that lead up to around the menopause area, many of which kick in far, far earlier than the 50 that is the old traditional thought. Santiago, yes. Oh, humour, really? Yes, of course we should have humour. What a lovely thing to remind us all about. How many terrible meetings have you all been in over the last 2 years on Teams and Zoom? I've been in some really spectacularly bad meetings where the only thing that saved us is a sense of humour. One of the things that I think we may also have forgotten or perhaps put to one side is the joy of having fun together. And that isn't always a rip-roaring joke or an amazing piece of humour, but just having a pleasant experience together. And I think that really speaks to that. It's good for your hormones, it's good for how you feel, it's good for your interaction with your colleagues. And having thought that I'd organised an epic number of incredible sessions with people over the last 18 months, the one that everybody remembers is the one where we just got a very simple go and grab something from your house and that reminds you of your country. And we had the most hilarious hour with people popping up on screen wearing sombreros and waving flags and putting on T-shirts and just talking about themselves and their life. And that's the one everyone remembers. All those other really important meetings I thought we'd organised, no one remembers those. It was the human touch. And I think that's what humour's all about. It's about the humanity. That's really the fundamental part of humour. So really, really helpful. Thank you, Santiago, for that. And Vlatka, I've ordered your book on Amazon whilst you were talking. So I think your sales are just about to go up. But I think there's also something really helpful for people in terms of having a structure around the different types of leadership that there is. And I know we all, I think today appreciate command and control has very little place anywhere, but also about how do you keep getting yourself to the next level? How do you flex to be appropriate in certain circumstances? And what do you do about really bringing that into the business place, particularly, and I think this is a real cultural challenge, a real international challenge, is when you work with people in many different cultures, some of whom have very different hierarchical structures. How would you actually manage those different leadership styles in a way that works cross-border, cross-culture? Because certainly the Western Northern Hemisphere does not have all the answers to this for sure. So it'd be really interesting if you have a moment to talk about that. as well. So I loved it, Richard. Really entertaining. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a good one, wasn't it? I agree. And thank you for those kind thoughts as ever. And let's just pick up Francesca's point, if I may, to Sarah, around this. I'm not sure the technical term premenopause was the term I heard. It may not have been technically called that, but this isn't something that suddenly happens overnight. I think it's a sort of process that you say grows and actually starts behavior shifting during that period, even if people are perhaps aren't aware of it even. Do you want to kind of explore that area a bit too? Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Francesca, you used the term perimenopause, and what the perimenopause is any time when you start with menopause symptoms up until a year after your last period. So we're about to talk about things like that on air on a Friday morning. But yeah, for women, it starts in the 40s. So actually just having that recognition, but this is where actually the guys come in, because many of you will be have females in your teams in that age group. As women choose to have their families later, often these women are what we call the sandwich generation. So not only have they got really demanding careers, they've got leadership positions themselves, they're managing teams, they also probably still have dependent children at home, and quite possibly are also looking after the generation above. So they have lots on their plate. And unfortunately, over years as a GP, I have seen high-flying women basically accept a lower level of responsibility, give up their management responsibilities, or worst case, resign in the menopause. And it's an absolute travesty, because these women really are an asset. What I didn't say in the trivia fact is that the short-finned pilot whales, the killer whales, and women are the only mammals who remain in proximity to the young of their society for the whole of their lifespan. And so what we see is that there is advantage to the whole community, to the whole society, in having women in menopause. And so we've got to start to help, recognize perimenopause, support people through it, have a culture like we have with mental health, a culture where actually it's okay to say, I'm having a bad day today, I didn't sleep last night, and to know that there's that support. So it's been a really lovely, energizing session, but it's all about enabling people, isn't it, to bring their best self, but their whole self to work. And if your whole self is, I'm really struggling with the menopause at the moment, then it's important to be able to acknowledge that.
Thank you. Santiago, perhaps I could almost talk to another part of your amazing brain. To what extent is this, staying with the menopause and this whole issue of health, to what extent is that built into the sort of management leadership courses that business schools run? Is this something that has time to fit in with strategy, or where does it fit in your mind? You're mute again, sorry.
No, absolutely, and welfare is now becoming embedded across many different programs. Of course, I mean, a very important part of welfare, and of course, leadership, as I said before, is how to become a more humorous and motivating people. In fact, you showed this research at the beginning of this seminar, of this panel, where you showed that motivating others is one of the major things linked to leadership, one of the most demanded skills among leaders. And my point is that by becoming a more humorous person, by using, the humor as well as laughter at meetings and elsewhere at the workplace, you can actually motivate others much more. You can become a better leader. You can actually increase productivity. So it's not just a question of, enhancing the role of humor in the workplace or trying to have fun. It's a question of building up a culture which is more consistent and that produces much better results. There's a further point here. We are all aware about the clash that we live today at many different institutions, particularly at universities, this cultural clash between freedom of expression and speech, and on the other hand, respect for diversity and inclusion, which particularly in the environment of universities is something that we are trying to solve in the best possible way in order to create a learning, atmosphere. And my feeling is that probably the use of humor, along with respect, of course, can actually play a very good role here. Jokes is the only way to sort out, these challenge, this balance, this needed balance between freedom of speech and respect for diversity. So I guess that if we want to make a much better organization or even a better society, we should pay much more attention to humor and laughter.
Vlatka, it's probably an awkward question, but humor and the management shift, I mean, do you find humor and welfare possibly that goes with it as something that is very important to management, or is this something that comes with the culture and the organizational culture that they're trying to create? I'd also like to pick up Francesca's point around how you manage different parts of the organization which are operating at different levels at the same time.
Thank you. Great question. Absolutely. Humor is inherent in the level 4 and 5 mindset and culture. I would also say that humor can lead to better psychological safety as well. And at level 4 and 5, it's all about having fun working as well. And it's all about communication. We also know there is a research where there is a link between humor and well-being, where laughter can be a healing tool as well. And also from other pieces of research, we know how much well-being is now important, and leaders can play a very important role. So at level 4-5, leaders create a healthy workplaces. At lower levels, they create control, even toxic workplaces, where in some cases people even kill themselves because of the pressures of work. So we want to work at the other end of the spectrum, really promoting humor, well-being, compassion, and also igniting this common passion for common purpose to make this world a better place, to do well and do good at the same time. So absolutely, I agree 100% with everything that was said. A very good question. We see quite often pockets of different levels within the same organization. So you can have one department. I'll give you one example. One of the companies I work with, the producer of equipment for electronics industry, they had a new level 4 CEO. So overall culture was level 4 on average. Then they had the production department, which was level 3, because they needed to have some elements of control to ensure quality. I would not tell air traffic controllers just experiment with ideas, don't worry about rules and regulations. So in some cases, when it's about safety, security, compliance, we need some elements of level 3 as well, but in a healthy way, not in a toxic way. And at the same time, they had a R&D department, which was level 5. Anything goes, experiment with ideas, everything is relaxed. And so, but overall, the culture was level 4. And again, they achieved profit increase in by 100% in 1 year. And there are many, many other examples I can share. And one final tip I would like to suggest to leaders: always lead from the one level above. So if somebody's at level 2, they do minimum. You need to lead from level 3 to make sure you help them to shift to level 3. We only can shift one level at a time. We can't skip the levels. If somebody is operating from level 3 and they are ready to go through this big shift, then empower them, give them some flexibility, let them make some decisions, let them self-organize in some communities of passion and pursue some projects and so on. So it's all contextual as well.
Which is great, but then you possibly have an issue around authenticity, because if you are a natural level 4 leader and you're thinking you're going to have to become a level 2 leader in order to help somebody who's at level 1, how do you reconcile that? And I'll just throw that one to Francesca and get her thoughts on that.
I love it that you do that too, Richard. Well, isn't it just about being flexible in your style and being alive to what's needed in the circumstance? But it's not about changing your personality, because I love that air traffic controller. I just love the thought that you could just let's have a little brainstorm and decide to do it differently today. There's certain things where you have to be quite flexible to enable you to get the message you need to get over. I used to run a very technical department, a very technical tax department, and it was, as you'd expect, full of people with enormous brains, huge, deep analytical brains. And we did a little exercise about styles, preferences. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what you do all the time, but preferences. And there's many different ways of doing that, but we did the color one. It's called insights. But broadly, you've got different colors, and most of the team sat in that deep greeny blue analytical territory. And there was one person who was a very command and control individual who sat in that hot red spot. And then there was me, yellow, woo, all yellow, positive, sort of all into the inspiration, motivational piece. But the reason that team worked well is we did have some different variations within there. But equally, I knew that if I was too yellow, oh, it's all going to be fine, rah, all the time with them, they found it quite exhausting. And equally, if they were just super, super analytical 24/7 with me, they just wouldn't get the results that they were looking for. So we all learned to flex our style. But half of it is about understanding where people's preferences are and having a aliveness and awareness of that. And also being able to flex to make sure the message is being put across in a way that is both comprehensible, helpful, and is understanding of where that person is, just like you do with a client. You step into the client's shoes, that doesn't mean you stop being yourself. So I think you can use all that knowledge and that self-awareness to get you to a place which can be most effective.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of today's show, which is really sad. So I'll give each of the panelists an opportunity to leave you with one final thought. I'll start off with Sarah. What's your message for today for the audience?
My message today is value your menopausal workforce. They are a huge asset. Support them to stay in and thrive and continue to be wonderful in your workplace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Santiago, again, you're mute, I'm afraid, but what's your message for today?
Well, my message would be, we are now exiting the pandemic, and we have the challenge of building a happier society. And I guess that one of the drivers to achieve that goal can actually be the use of humor and laughter at work.
Oh, Richard, you're on.
Sorry, my turn. Yeah, Vlatka, what's your message for today?
With our neuron brain cells, we pick up the moods and emotions of people around us. So when we operate at levels 4 or 5, we spread the positive ripples. And I just want everybody to be aware that you are very, very powerful with your thoughts, emotions, behaviors. You create those ripples, which spread to your team, and then they spread to the rest of the organizations, and then to the rest of the society. So be mindful and make sure that you stay at level 4 and help others around you to operate at that level, and then everything will change.
Fantastic. Well, I think this is probably the point where I have to say thank you very much to my wonderful panel for today's show. I'd like to thank Dr. Sarah Hattam for raising a topic that genuinely isn't probably raised enough, but certainly affects half the people living in the world, so can't be ignored any longer, I think. I'd like to thank Santiago for coming down from what many people would see as a very serious senior role and reminding us that actually humor is so important, and how you can even do that in the most driest of business meetings. And Vlatka for giving us a framework, which if you haven't read the Management Shift book, please get, because I think that's been really helped me in my thinking as well. And lastly to Francesca, and I loved your story about I'm yellow and I'm rushing around doing this, but I have to recognize that I've got a couple of reds and green in the corner over there. So thank you again for all of you for your wonderful input. And we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another show. And I look forward to seeing you all then. Bye for now.